Okay, folks, and we're back with lesson 5. Now, today we're going to look at Lady Macbeth, who's obviously a massive part of Macbeth, really big character, really useful for you as a student because she's a really interesting character for lots of different reasons, and she's an excellent character to analyse and look at her language and look at her actions and look at her place in the play in relation to context. So that's what we're going to look through. We're going to go through, have a look at her and the way that she's introduced at the beginning of this play so that you can start writing about her. So we'll start off with a little bit of a note about context, because context is always important, but it's really important when it comes to Lady Macbeth because she's a woman. And that might not seem like as much of a significant thing in today's society as it did in Jacobean times, but that's what we need to think about, how much of an influence she plays in terms of being a woman in Jacobean times. So in order to do that, we need to know what a woman in Jacobean times was supposed to be like. So we need to think really carefully about how she fits into the hierarchy and how she fits into society. So this idea that women had a really clear role. They were supposed to be caregivers and mothers, so they're supposed to be sort of nurturing and mild and caring. They're also not supposed to have any influence over their husbands, because when it comes to the great chain of being, which I know we've spoke about a lot, they are lower in the great chain of being than men. And therefore, they shouldn't have any influence over their husbands, over men. So they're there just to be compliant and do as they're told and look after children and be a good hostess. And that's kind of their role in Jacobean times. So that's what people would expect of women in those times as well. Remember, this play was written in a time when women weren't even allowed to appear on stage. So if you went to see Macbeth at the time when it was first performed in 1606, it would be a man who was playing Lady Macbeth on stage, or a boy who was playing Lady Macbeth on stage. And that should tell you all you need to know about a woman's role in society at that time. So when we look at her as a character, you will get a real feel for exactly how little she plays up to that role of a Jacobean woman. She really doesn't fit that stereotype at all. All right? So let's have a look at Lady Macbeth. And in this first time when we meet her, we're introduced to 3 distinctly different personalities that she puts forward. And these 3 different sides to Lady Macbeth play a big part in her portrayal at the beginning of the play. So what you need to think about is how she puts herself across as a typical Jacobean woman, this sort of hostess, this caring woman, and that's the side that she puts across to all the other characters in the play. Then there's a side that Macbeth sees, which is this controlling and manipulative side that she doesn't show to other characters, but she does show to Macbeth in trying to get him to do things that she wants. But then there's another side, and this comes about from the soliloquies that we're introduced to through Lady Macbeth, and that is these sides, this side of her dark, ambitious and unfortunately quite mad side of her that only we see through her soliloquies. So that's really important that we acknowledge that we get to see a side of Lady Macbeth that not even Macbeth sees, an internal side that makes us worried about what her intentions are. And that's important to note, that part of the engagement with Lady Macbeth comes from the fact that we see a side of her that no one else gets to see, and we know things about her that no one else knows. And that actually feeds into the next lesson, which is about dramatic irony. And if you watch that next, you'll understand that that's quite an important part of what Lady Macbeth is as well. But the other side of this is in Act 1, Scene 5, when we first meet her, we get to see a glimpse of all these different parts, although we get a few more than others. So the first one is her as a typical woman. So in Act 1, Scene 5, she doesn't show as much of this side of her personality, and we'll get back to that in a minute. But she talks to a messenger who gives her information that Macbeth is bringing the king to their castle, and she acts perfectly normally towards the messenger. She acts outwardly like a typical Elizabethan woman, and that's absolutely fine. We don't get to see a lot of this side in this scene for a couple of reasons. One is because her other sides are far more interesting to an audience. So the fact that she manipulates her husband and the fact that she's actually quietly mad, they link to a more engagement with the audience, this idea that she's strange and in some ways worrying, and that's more interesting. So we get to see those sides more than we get to see a boring normal side. The other reason is because in the scene after this, which we'll look at in the next video, when she interacts with Duncan and she seems normal, it's important that we know at that stage that she's not normal, because that's more engaging as well. If we see that she's mad and that she's dark in the first time that we meet her, it's engaging for us, but it's also quite important for the rest of the play, because it means that next time we see her and she's acting normally, we know that actually really she's not normal, and that's quite an engaging thing too. So structurally, that's why it's important that we don't get introduced to this boring part of her first, if you like, this traditional part of her first. So what about the other bits? So what about her as dark and mad? So we could argue that this is the most interesting part of her personality, and this is what Shakespeare focuses on first. So we're focused upon this side of her through her language and her actions and the things that she wants to happen. Now, you've probably read through this scene quite a few times, so you'll know the major soliloquy in this is the part where she asks for the qualities to kill Duncan and then become queen. And that section is incredibly important in demonstrating what Lady Macbeth is like. There are lots of really good quotes in this part, so I've picked out a few here that kind of illustrate how unstable she is, but there are other elements that also link quite heavily to themes like the supernatural and deception. So you want to go through that and maybe look for more quotes than this, but these ones are a good place to start when we're talking about who Lady Macbeth is and how she shows us this darkness of inner soul. Okay, so "Unsex me here" is a really famous quote, and you can see that there on line 39. And that's well worth looking at for lots of different reasons. And if you've not got your book out yet, make sure you do that. Stop the video, go and get your copy and come back and annotate these things if you haven't done so already. Linguistically, we could argue that there's an imperative there, and she's requesting that dark forces come and give her qualities, or remove qualities, I suppose, in this case, that will stop her doing bad things, because she wants to do the bad things. The fact she's talking to dark spirits, the fact she's commanding dark spirits, demonstrates the darkness and the madness that she illustrates here. Stop up the access and passage to remorse, the idea that women would feel remorse and guilt for bad situations because they're so gentle and kind and caregiving. She's asking for the power to stop that from happening so that she can go through with these different ideas, these different this different plan that she wants to kill the king. "Unsex me here" links to that because she knows the remorse will come from being a woman. "Take my milk for gall" is huge because it illustrates that she's trying to sacrifice the motherly parts of her to turn herself into something poisonous and merciless. And we've got juxtaposition there, which is really important. The milk and the gall, the sort of caregiving aspects and the nurturing, the life-giving aspects for the gall, the dark, poisonous, vinegarous substances that are the direct opposite of milk. Also, the idea of milk being natural and nature and turning nature on its head. So we've got all those themes starting to link together nicely in her language, and that's really important. The last one here, "Pull thee in the dunnest smoke of hell, that my keen knife see not the wound it makes." There's a few different elements to this quote that make it really effective. Obviously, the dunnest smoke of hell, the idea of pull thee, which we would associate with funerals, and the smoke of hell, which we would associate with very dark, nasty, sinister, supernatural elements, links to Christianity and the religion at the time, but also the idea that she's calling upon the forces of hell to cover up the deeds that she's intending to perform, so that it can't be seen by things further up the great chain of being, and they won't intervene. So that's really important. Now, the fact she personifies the knife, that my keen knife see not the wound it makes, is quite telling in itself. It's a great line, and the idea of the knife is obviously linked to the violence and the killing of Duncan. But the other thing that's really important is by personifying the knife, she almost removes herself from the crime. And this might be quite an early indication that she won't be able to deal with what her and Macbeth eventually end up doing in the play. And that's quite a good thing to look at, to show the other side of the meaning. Although she's asking for all these aspects to come to her and stop her feeling bad and feeling sorry for what she's done, actually the fact that she has to personify the knife as if it's the knife that's doing the stabbing and not her shows that maybe she's really not ready to be undertaking these sorts of acts. But they're really useful quotes. All those are useful quotes in showing that she's dark and mad, and that would be very engaging to a Jacobean audience. The other aspect that links to that is her as being incredibly ambitious. Now, women weren't supposed to be ambitious because they had no real opportunity to get themselves up any hierarchy, any ladder of power. The only way that Lady Macbeth stands a chance of getting any power is by becoming queen to Macbeth's king. She can only be married to a more powerful man. That's the only thing she can do. And this ambition is really surprising to a Jacobean audience. And this comes in the way of these three quotes mainly. The fact she's worried about her husband Macbeth's character, and she says, too full of the milk of human kindness to catch the nearest way, implying that he's too nice or too obedient to get the nearest way to the throne, which would be to kill Duncan. And she's worried that he hasn't got the drive and the ambition to do that. And again, we've got that metaphor of the milk of human kindness, and milk being a natural thing and a pleasant thing, and that Macbeth's actually got that quality to him and she doesn't want him to have. She then goes on, that I may pour my spirits in thine ear. And that's quite a sinister idea, the fact that she's going to deliberately manipulate him to do something that he clearly doesn't want to do and she knows that he won't want to do. So that's an intent from Lady Macbeth. And that's engaging to an audience, the idea that she might have that power over her husband. And I want you to think about those two quotes put together and the way that they fit in terms of saying what it says about Macbeth at this stage and how she's going to achieve what she wants through him. And then the final one is the fatal entrance of Duncan under my battlements. So obviously fatal entrance illustrates her intention, even though she never says specifically that she's going to murder him. There are all these lovely quotes that hint at what her intentions are. And my battlements is quite significant. So my being a determiner in terms of showing her possession, her ownership of the castle, and how she sees it being her castle, not Macbeth's castle, but Lady Macbeth's castle. And she rules over that castle. She's the one with the power. And just that simple little determiner, my battlements, is very telling in her view of what she sees as being her role and where she is in the hierarchy. She's already unnatural, if you like, in terms of the way that she fits with what's going on. So what else do we need to consider? Her as a manipulator. So when we think about when Macbeth arrives, we see this other side to her where she's not dark and mad, but she is very manipulative. And that's the side that she shows to Macbeth. So this is when Macbeth comes back and returns to the castle in the same scene, and she seems to manipulate him in a certain way to try and get him to do what she wants him to do. And again, we've got really useful use of language in terms of imperatives and modal verbs that show the influence she has over Macbeth. So when she says, look like the innocent flower, but be the serpent under it, she uses imperatives. Wonderful metaphor, wonderful imagery there that you could talk about deception, appearance versus reality. She's trying to teach him to be more like her because she is excellent at looking one way and appearing on the outside to be one way, but internally being something completely opposite. And that's what that says, while also drawing on the imagery of the Bible and the idea of Adam and Eve and the serpent, and that cultural illusion, which we've spoken about before, and how powerful that would be to a Jacobean audience who were all very religious Christians. You shall put this night's great business into my dispatch. Is taking control. She's taking control of the situation, which a man really shouldn't allow a woman to do in these times. And she also uses the modal verb shall there to really demonstrate she's the one that's going to control it, and that's what he's going to do. There's also the wonderful noun phrase, this night's great business, which is the idea that she's going to kill the king, or they're going to kill the king. She's going to organise it, but she doesn't use that word. She uses these ambiguous words that don't illustrate exactly what her intentions are. So there are all these things going on in the background here with Lady Macbeth, and they're all incredibly significant and important. So bear all those quotes in mind, because they're all going to be useful to you in finding a way to demonstrate how engaging she is as a character and how important she is to the narrative. She is this catalyst that causes all these events to start happening much faster than they should do. And we'll have a look at how she manages to manipulate Macbeth further in later videos. But for now, we'll get to the summary part. So what I want you to do is have a go at summarising these ideas. So somewhere you should be able to, from this video, you should be able to summarise these two different concepts. What were women expected to be like in Jacobean times? So make sure you've got some notes on that. What are expectations of women? So what would an audience enter a play thinking women should be like? And then the second one is, what are the three different sides of Lady Macbeth that we get to see as an audience? Not everybody in the play gets to see these, but we do as an audience. So you should have an idea about those two things, and you've got plenty of information there that you can go at with that. That leads to our big questions for this lesson, and those are, in which ways is Lady Macbeth not a typical Jacobean woman? So this links heavily to context. Okay, but we also need to use those quotes to show she should be this way, but she's actually this way. And that's really effective for you, because we've got a lot of different things that we can talk about here with Lady Macbeth in terms of, like we said before, deception, appearance versus reality, that darkness, supernatural element, all those different things can tie into this question. And it leads us to a bigger question, which is, why is Lady Macbeth such an engaging character? So think about an audience's reaction. Think about the structure of the play and what we know and how Lady Macbeth might contribute to the situation as it starts to move forward. So we've already seen Macbeth start to change his intentions to becoming king. How is Lady Macbeth going to change that and build the tension around those concepts of what's going to happen to Duncan? That's really important, that we see why is she important to the whole narrative, not just as a single character on her own. So think about the way it all ties in. Okay, now hopefully you can have a go at those, and they're really useful mini essays for you to write that will contribute to bigger essays when you actually ask them under exam conditions. That knowledge is going to be important, and applying it in this way is important. Okay, so I'm hoping that that's been useful. Obviously you can watch through that again. Make sure your annotations are good in your copy of the play, and get your summaries down somewhere, maybe on a revision card, and then have a go at writing these out in a little bit more detail so you feel comfortable using the terms and talking about this character and the reasons why she's effective in this play. Okay, next lesson is dramatic irony, which will be the next scene, which still features Lady Macbeth. So we'll be adding to some of the information that we've got here already. Okay, I'll see you for that one.